Night had already folded itself over the city when the old freight elevator shuttered open. 3 people stepped out, Leora, Jalen, and Miri, each carrying questions too heavy for their own minds. They had followed the whispers to this abandoned rooftop, that someone waited here, someone who could explain why certain dreams felt more real than daylight and why flashes of memory appeared in meditation like artifacts from another lifetime. A man stood at the edge of the roof, leaning gently against a rusted railing. His name, he said, was Orin. Not master, not teacher, just someone who had walked ahead for a little while and turned back to show the path. A soft wind pushed through the open structure, bringing the scent of rain. Orin lifted his hand without speaking, as if inviting them to sit, and they did so instinctively, forming a loose circle on the cracked concrete. He began with something simple, spoken in a voice that felt more like a memory than sound. "There is a map older than any scripture," he said. "Not drawn by the hands of prophets or mystics, but carved into the architecture of consciousness itself." His eyes drifted across their faces, not judging, only recognizing. "You're not here to learn something new. You're here to remember something you left behind." Leora shifted slightly, trying to calm the tremor in her chest. The city's lights flickered below them like a second sky. She asked the question that had been pressing against her ribs for months: why does everything feel wrong lately? Like the world is a mask slipping off. Orin smiled, not because she was mistaken, but because she was finally seeing. "Because you're standing at the threshold," he said. "And thresholds distort things. You sense the edges of the illusion you've been walking inside. This is what happens before the remembering begins." He paused as a distant siren wailed far below, then continued. "Most people never notice the fabric of the world folding. They stay entranced by noise. But when you begin to feel the seams, the mind panics, the heart trembles, and the soul prepares for something it's been waiting for longer than your lifetime." Jalen, who had been silent until now, spoke with a breath that cracked midway through. "Is that what the dreams are? The place with the door made of light? I keep trying to open it, but it burns." Orin nodded. "You're touching the boundary. That door isn't outside you. It's the final level of your own consciousness revealing itself before you're ready to step through." Miri leaned forward. "Final level of what?" Orin lowered himself onto the dusty ground, folding his cloak beneath him. "Of self-awareness. Of remembering who's been watching your whole life unfold. You are not climbing upward toward God. You are sinking inward toward the source." The air stilled around them as though the rooftop itself was listening. "In the oldest teachings," Orin said, "this world wasn't seen as a test. It was seen as a veil. The veil was woven by forces that wanted you to forget your original nature, not out of evil, but out of their own confusion. And so they built a realm where memory sleeps." Leora felt a warmth rise in her spine, like something waking up. "If the world is a veil," she whispered, "what are we supposed to do?" "Lift it," Orin said gently. "But not by force. By recognition." He drew a small circle in the dust with one finger. "You've spent your whole life believing you're the character in the center of this circle. Your stories, your triumphs, your pain, they all feel like you. But this is only the mask you wear while walking through the veil. The final level is simply remembering the one who put the mask on." A soft hum of electricity came from the neon sign mounted to the half-collapsed wall behind them. It cast a halo of red light over Orin's face, giving him a quiet, almost timeless presence. He continued, "You've each felt moments where the mask slipped. Déjà vu so strong it made you dizzy. Dreams that didn't feel like dreams. A sudden sense of watching yourself from outside your body. These are fractures in the veil. Glimpses of the consciousness beneath the character. Jalen swallowed hard. So we're, what? Not real? You are real, Orin said. But the you defend, fear, and grieve is only a surface reflection. The final level is the one who stands behind the reflection and sees through it. Miri wrapped her arms around her knees. So why does it feel scary? Why does the world feel like it's coming apart? Because your mind believes it's dying, Orin said softly. It thinks the story is ending. But in truth, the story is being remembered. He looked up at the dark sky, as if searching for a language it once carried. Every time your awareness expands, the illusion that kept you safe begins to crack. That's why so many stop here. This is the point where people turn back. Leora felt the weight of those words. She thought of the nights she couldn't sleep, the strange flashes of golden light behind her eyelids, the sense that she wasn't alone inside her own head. She whispered, almost too softly to hear, "So what happens next?" Orin leaned in, voice steady, warm. You begin the remembering. Slowly. Gently. Without forcing anything open. He lifted his hand again, palm facing upward. And you stop trying to escape the world. Instead, you let the world become transparent. You look through it, not at it. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and the group felt a subtle shift, as if the rooftop had become suspended between worlds for a heartbeat. The final level, he said, opening his eyes again, isn't somewhere you reach after death. It's a realization that blooms while you're still here. And you are closer to it than you think. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of distant rain and moving their hair gently across their faces. Each of them felt something settle inside them, a quiet understanding, fragile but real. Orin stood, brushing the dust from his hands. Tonight, you crossed the threshold. Not by accident. Not by luck. But because the remembering called you, and you listened. He looked at each of them in turn, his gaze steady and welcoming. Now, he said softly, we walk into the part most seekers never reach. The next night, the three returned to the rooftop long before Orin arrived. The city stretched beneath them like a restless sea of lights, and the wind carried the distant hum of trains and passing sirens. Leora paced in slow circles, feeling a pressure at the base of her skull, as if something inside her was trying to surface. Jalen sat with his back against a pillar, fingers tapping nervously. Miri whispered fragments of her dreams under her breath, dreams of corridors made of mirrors and a voice calling her by a name she couldn't remember upon waking. When Orin finally stepped through the elevator frame, the air stilled, as if the building itself recognized him. He walked without hurry, but there was a heaviness in his posture now, a gravity that hadn't been there the night before. You came back, he said softly. Most people don't. Leora stopped pacing. Why wouldn't they? Because once you cross the threshold, the world begins to resist your remembering. Not consciously. But the veil you live inside is self-preserving. It bends, it distracts, it confuses. It's not malicious, just afraid. Jalen frowned. Afraid of what? Of dissolving, Orin answered. Everything that is built on forgetting will fight to stay intact. He walked toward the low concrete wall at the edge of the roof, placing his palm against its rough surface. Think of the mind as a house filled with furniture you didn't choose. Beliefs placed there long before you knew you had a say. The final level asks you to walk through that house and notice what's not yours. But the house panics when you do. It tries to protect what it thinks is survival. Miri wrapped her arms around herself. You said last night that most people turn back here. Why is this part so hard? Orin turned, his face warm but serious. Because now you encounter the three deepest traps. The ones that catch almost everyone. He motioned for them to sit. They formed the same quiet circle as before, though tonight their breaths came slower, heavier. The neon sign flickered behind them, casting its warm red glow into the stillness. The first trap, Orin began, is the mission. Leora tilted her head. You mean a spiritual purpose? Yes. The idea that you were sent here to do something grand. To save. To awaken. To heal the world. It feels noble, powerful. But it's a trap woven from identity. As long as you cling to a mission, you cling to the character performing it. And the final level cannot be reached by a character. Only by the consciousness behind it. Jalen swallowed hard. But, if I stop believing in my mission, won't everything lose meaning? Orin nodded gently. Yes. And that's why it's so effective. Letting go of the mission feels like walking off a cliff. But the truth is, you're stepping off a stage you were never meant to live on forever. He leaned back, letting the wind rustle his cloak. The second trap is even more subtle, the identity of being awake. Miri exhaled shakily. You mean, we can get attached to awakening itself? Very much so, Orin said. Once the veil thins, it's intoxicating. You feel special. You feel ahead. You feel like you've discovered a secret. That sense of spiritual identity becomes a new mask, one far harder to remove than the ordinary one. Leora stared at the ground. She remembered the thrill she felt every time she sensed synchronicity or glimpsed something luminous during meditation. She realized how deeply she loved being different. Being awakened. Being chosen. Orin's voice softened, as if sensing her thoughts. Awakening is not a crown. It's a lantern. And you don't hold it, you remember that you are it. He paused, letting that settle. The third trap, he continued quietly, is the fear you felt last night. The terror of dissolving. Jalen's jaw clenched. The fear that I'm disappearing? That the you who speaks, thinks, hopes, and fears will not survive the remembering, Orin said. And in a way, that fear is correct. The separate self does not cross the boundary. Only the awareness behind it moves forward. A shiver ran down Leora's spine. So what do we do with that fear? Honor it, Orin said. Fear is the mind's way of saying it doesn't know how to follow. You don't need to kill the ego. You don't need to silence it. You simply reassure it, you don't have to do this part. I'll take it from here. Miri's eyes glistened. It sounds so simple when you say it. Orin shook his head gently. Simple, yes. Easy, no. The final level is not locked. It is simply unchosen by most. Because choosing it means stepping beyond everything the world says you are. He reached into the pocket of his cloak and pulled out a small piece of broken glass, smooth at the edges. Holding it up, he let it catch the neon glow. This world is like this shard, he said. Beautiful, reflective, full of colors. But it only shows fragments. You have mistaken those fragments for your whole self. He handed the shard to Jalen. Look, Orin said. Jalen gazed into the small mirror. He saw his face fractured into tiny shapes, overlapping and distorted. "This is how I see myself," he whispered. "Exactly," Orin said. "The final level isn't about becoming more. It's about remembering the one who is holding the mirror." He stood and walked toward the edge of the rooftop again. "You will be tempted to cling to the familiar, your identities, your spiritual pride, your mission. These are the last anchors. Tonight, I want you to see them clearly." He turned back to them, silhouetted against the trembling lights of the city. His voice was no longer soft, but resonant, steady. "You are not the rescuer. You are not the awakened one. You are not the story. You are the awareness watching all of it unfold." The words flowed through them like a warm tide, dissolving something tight inside their chests. Orin bowed his head slightly. When you can sit without needing any of those masks, the final level reveals itself. Not as a destination, but as your original face. The wind shifted again, cooler now, carrying the scent of wet stone. Far below, thunder rumbled. Something had changed in the air, subtle but undeniable, as if the world had exhaled around them. Orin lifted his gaze. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will learn what it means to walk as someone who remembers." The rooftop felt different on the third night, lighter somehow, as if the air itself had thinned and the sky leaned closer to listen. A soft mist drifted around the edges of the building, glowing faintly under the city lights. Leora stepped out of the elevator first, and for the first time she didn't feel the familiar pressure inside her chest. Instead, she felt spacious. As if some inner boundary had quietly expanded overnight. Jalen followed her, holding the piece of glass Orin had given him. He kept turning it in his fingers, watching the distorted reflections shift. Miri came last, her steps slower, more grounded. She held herself differently now, not tense or guarded, but as if she had been rearranged from the inside. Orin stood near the center of the roof, eyes closed, listening to something none of them could hear. When he opened his eyes, they were calm in a way that didn't seem entirely human, like still water untouched by wind. "You felt it," he said softly. "Haven't you?" Leora nodded. "Some things, quieter." Jalen added, "and wider. Like my thoughts aren't pressed against my skull anymore." Miri smiled faintly. "I feel like I'm waking up into something I've always known." Orin stepped closer, his cloak brushing lightly against the cracked concrete. "That quietness," he said, "is one of the first signs. When you approach the final level, the mind begins to lose its grip on the constant story it tells about you. It still speaks, but not with the same authority. Its voice becomes one of many instead of the only one." He motioned for them to sit, but this time he sat with them, not as a teacher above them, but as someone who recognized them as equals. "There are several signs," he continued. "Not mystical, not dramatic, just true. And once you see them, you can no longer pretend you are the character you used to believe you were." Jalen leaned forward. "What signs?" Orin began counting on his fingers. "First, you start to feel like the world is transparent. Not unreal, but thin, like a backdrop you can see through if you soften your eyes." Leora inhaled sharply. "Yes. Exactly that." "Second," Orin said, "your emotions no longer define you. They rise and fall like weather, but something inside you remains untouched, like clear sky behind every storm." Miri nodded slowly. She had cried that afternoon, not out of sadness, but because the sadness moved through her without asking for permission, like a passing bird. Third, Orin said, lowering his voice, you feel watched. But not by anyone outside you. You feel watched from within. By the deeper self you forgot. A shiver passed through them, not from cold but recognition. And fourth, Orin said, you begin to feel like you're living your life from a slight distance, not dissociated, but expanded, like you're both in the scene and observing it at the same time. Jalen exhaled shakily. That's been happening every day. Orin smiled gently. Good. It means the awareness beneath the mask is waking up. And now you must stabilize it. He reached into his cloak again and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. He placed it in the center of the circle. This is a practice, he said. Simple. Ancient. Offered only at the threshold you now stand on. Leora unfolded the paper carefully. Inside was a single sentence written in delicate handwriting. I am the one who sees through the story. Orin nodded toward it. This is your recognition practice. Speak it aloud each morning, not as a mantra, not as an affirmation, but as a remembering. Let it guide your breath. Let it remind you that you are the awareness watching the character unfold, not the character struggling to be enough. They took turns whispering the line, and each time one of them said it, the air seemed to thicken with a soft hum, like the rooftop responded to the truth spoken into it. When they finished, Orin stood and walked to the very edge of the roof. The mist swirled at his feet, glowing faintly under the neon light. There is one more practice, he said, turning back toward them. A nightly one. Some call it a death rehearsal. Not because you are dying, but because the separate self must learn to rest without fear. He lowered himself to sit on the ledge, legs hanging over the open darkness. Before you sleep each night, he said, lie on your back. Breathe gently. And pretend that everything you think you are, your name, your past, your hopes, your wounds, is being set down beside you like clothing at the end of the day. One piece at a time. Until only the awareness remains. The watcher. The one behind the mask. Leora felt her breath deepen. What happens when we get to that state? You realize you've never been anything else. Silence surrounded them. The city no longer sounded like chaos, it sounded like a distant river flowing through another world. Miri asked the question they had all been holding. So, are we already at the final level? Orin smiled, and for a moment it looked as if the mist itself brightened around him. The final level isn't a place. It's a seeing. A recognition that the one who has been searching is the one who has been here all along. He walked toward them slowly, and they felt the air shift with each step. You are at the final level, he said softly. Not because you climbed here. But because you stopped running from what you are. He reached out and placed a hand gently on Leora's shoulder, then Jalen's, then Miri's. Now, he said, you live from it. Quietly. Softly. Without needing to announce anything to the world. Let the awakening become the way you breathe. The mist swirled once more around the rooftop, brighter now, as though responding to his words. The group sat in stillness, their breath sinking without effort. Something inside each of them had opened, wide, peaceful, unmistakably real. Orin stepped back, giving them space. The remembering has begun, he said. And it will not end. The following night, they did not meet on the rooftop. Orin had told them the remembering no longer required a sacred place, only a willing presence. Instead, they gathered in Leora's small apartment, a quiet space with dim lamps, soft blankets, and windows that looked out toward the same city that had once overwhelmed them. Tonight, it felt different. Calmer. As if the world outside had shifted just enough to match what was awakening within them. Miri lit a single candle in the center of the room. The flame flickered gently, casting long shadows across the walls. Jalen sat on the rug with his hands resting loosely on his knees, breathing slowly, as Orin had taught him. Leora stood by the window, watching headlights glide silently along distant streets. When Orin arrived, he carried no cloak, no ritual objects, no air of mystery. He looked almost ordinary, just a man walking into a warm room on a cool night. But something in his eyes still carried that depth, that stillness, that quiet awareness that seemed to wrap around the room like invisible silk. "You've come far," he said as he closed the door behind him. "And now we speak about how to live from the final level without losing yourselves in the noise again." He sat on the floor with them, legs folded, back straight but relaxed. "Many people touch the edge of awakening," he said. "Few remain there. Not because the light disappears, but because the world becomes loud again, and they forget. Forgetting is the default of this realm. Remembering must be done gently, daily, and with compassion." Jalen lifted his head. "How do we keep from slipping back?" Orin placed his hands on his knees. "By understanding the nature of the slip." He pointed to the candle. "The flame flickers not because it is weak, but because the air around it moves. Your awareness flickers the same way. Life stirs the air, responsibilities, emotions, fears, noise. They do not extinguish you. They only make you dance." He smiled softly. "Your work is simply to remain aware of the flame." Leora stepped away from the window, drawn toward his words. "So the goal isn't to stay perfectly calm all the time?" "No," Orin said. "That is another trap. The world will pull at you. Let it. Your task is not to avoid disturbance but to remember that disturbance happens within you, not to you. You are the sky, not the storm." Miri exhaled, eyes softening. "I think I finally understand." Orin continued, "There are 3 simple movements that keep you anchored in the final level. Not techniques. Not rituals. Just movements of awareness." He raised one finger. "First, return. Throughout the day, pause for a breath and return to the recognition, I am the one who sees through the story. Not forcing it, just remembering." A second finger. "Second, relax. When the mind tightens, when fear rises, when the old identity tries to reclaim control, relax your body. Relax even your face. Relaxation breaks the illusion of urgency." A third finger. "Third, receive. Let life come to you. Don't strain to control it. When you stop grasping, the world reveals itself with a softness you have forgotten." He lowered his hand. "If you do these 3 movements, even clumsily, awareness will settle into itself like a river returning to the sea." Jalen looked down at his hands. "It feels almost too gentle." Orin nodded. "Awakening is not violent. It is not dramatic. It is not a battle with darkness. It is a remembering so quiet that most people overlook it their entire lives." The candle flame stretched higher for a moment as if agreeing. "But there is one final piece," Orin said, shifting his posture slightly. "Something most teachings do not express clearly." He leaned forward. "You do not become the final level. You always were. What ends is the pretending. A stillness filled the room, thick, warm, indescribable. For a moment, even the city sounds faded into silence. Orin spoke again, his voice almost a whisper. You may feel moments where the world looks too real again. Moments where fear returns. Moments where you forget. That is all right. Forgetting is natural. Remembering is your birthright. Leora felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from relief, like something deep inside her had finally unclenched. Miri reached for her hand, and Leora didn't resist. Jalen looked up, eyes clearer than they had been in months. So what happens now? What are we supposed to do with this awakening? Orin smiled with the warmth of a sunrise. Live. Gently. With awareness. Share kindness without needing to call it spiritual. Walk through the world as someone who knows it is a veil, but also knows that the veil can be beautiful. He placed his hand on the floor beside him, grounding himself. And when life hurts, let it hurt. When joy arrives, let it pour. When uncertainty rises, let it hum. You do not need to perfect anything. The final level does not require perfection, it simply requires presence. He rose slowly to his feet. The three followed, standing in a loose circle around the candle. From this moment forward, Orin said, you are not students of awakening. You are participants in it. You are not seeking the path. You are the path. He bowed his head, not as a teacher, but as one consciousness recognizing another. Remember softly, he said. Live gently. And walk as though the world is a dream remembering itself. Then, with a slow breath, he extinguished the candle. The room dimmed, but inside each of them, something glowed with a steady, quiet light. Before we part, I want to speak directly to you, the one listening, watching, or perhaps simply feeling something stir inside. What you witnessed in this story isn't fantasy, and it isn't doctrine. It's a reminder of something you've probably felt before, that subtle pull toward a deeper awareness, the quiet sense that life is more layered than it appears, and the knowing that you are more than the role you've been playing. Awakening isn't loud. It doesn't need a temple or a master. It doesn't ask you to leave the world. It asks you to see through it with gentleness. Just like Leora, Jalen, and Miri, you might already be closer to this remembering than you think. Maybe you felt the thinness of the world during a moment of stillness, or heard your own mind from a slight distance, or sensed that your emotions are weather patterns and not your identity. These are signs. Quiet ones. Beautiful ones. If this story opened a door for you, even a small one, don't rush through it. Just sit with it. Let it breathe. Awakening unfolds in softness, not urgency. And if you found meaning here, I would be deeply grateful if you could support this space. Please consider subscribing, so we can keep exploring these quiet truths together. Give the video a like if it resonated with you, it helps others find it too. And share it with someone who might be walking their own quiet path, someone who may need a gentle reminder of who they are beneath the noise. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening deeply. And above all, thank you for remembering.